Mark Rogers TV just minutes after the Big Ten Championship game deciding the national championship participants. So the BCS is set with number 1 Florida State taking on number 2 Auburn. The voters will cast their votes officially on Sunday and the BCS rankings will be announced, but it seems to be very clear-cut at this point that most consider Florida State and Auburn to be the best 2 football teams in the country. I have my doubts, and not necessarily my doubts about the best 2 teams, but the deserving teams. And you know from watching my channel and video posts a number of times that I am a huge proponent of a legitimate playoff system, not the 14 playoff that we'll go to next season, but a legitimate playoff system. So I don't think that the BCS worked itself out, but for most college football fans, it did, and they believe that Florida State should be taking on Auburn in the championship game, and that's what we will get to see in about 4 to 5 weeks. Okay, the games that mattered today. ACC championship game. Florida State dismantled Duke as expected, 45-7. The Noles finished this season at 13-0, offensively getting off to a slow start. Credit Duke defensively. They turned over the Noles several times. I only saw about 12 plays in this game because of obviously the more competitive football games going on elsewhere at that point. But Florida State finally got it churning. Again, credit the Duke defense. They played extremely well deep into the third quarter in this game, kept it relatively close at 14-0 at the half. Jameis Winston, 330 yards passing, 4 touchdowns. He was intercepted twice as he put his final stamp, most likely, on the Heisman Trophy for 2013. So again, Florida State over Duke, indicating the weakness of the ACC to me. With a strong Clemson team, but some marginal teams after that in Duke, Miami, and Virginia Tech. Florida State dominant in its schedule top to bottom. A very weak schedule, but credit the Noles in dominating everybody across the board for 13 games. Their closest game was Boston College in winning by 14 points. Florida State over Duke 45-7. Of course, Auburn earlier in the day ran roughshod over Missouri's defense 59-42, a defense that is very fast, that led the nation with 95 tackles for loss. This Mizzou defense has one of the better secondaries in the country with 18 picks, which of course doesn't matter much against that Auburn run-happy offense. But that impressive triple option component, the read option, the zone read, and some components, again, of the wishbone and the triple option working for Auburn. And Gus Malzahn has resurrected this football program in 1 year. It's miraculous. And they win the SEC championship over Missouri 59-42. So some questions continue with the Auburn defense. But to beat Georgia, then of course Alabama in the Iron Bowl, and a very strong Missouri team in the SEC championship game, Auburn deservedly moves on to the BCS National Championship game. And again, credit Gus Malzahn for the resurrection there on the plains in Auburn. Again, the defense was a bit leaky, but the rushing offense, and it's just amazing that it's that dominant without much of a threat of a passing game. 296 yards last week against an Alabama rush defense that's possibly the best in the nation. And then against a Missouri team that gave up $184 to Texas A&M, but never gave up more than 200 rush yards this season, and held most of the better rushing teams on its schedule to about 100 to 120 yards. Mike Davis in South Carolina to 75 yards. And Auburn went off today for 554 yards in the rushing attack against Missouri, again winning 59-42. So Auburn is going crazy right now with the Ohio State loss in the Big Ten Championship game. Spartans win it 34-24. Michigan State came out firing, go up 17-0. This was a tale of 3 games as the Buckeyes then scored 24 unanswered, but Michigan State closed it out with another 17 in defeating the Buckeyes 34-24. So that heralded Michigan State defense showed up, number 1 rushing and total defense in the nation, number 4 scoring defense in the nation, held down the Buckeyes and Braxton Miller. Yes, Carlos Hyde ran for 118 yards, but didn't really go off against this Michigan State defense. What was impressive about this is Braxton Miller gained some yardage, and mostly on broken plays, not the designed runs. He gained most of his big plays on non-designed improv And that's when he got loose into the secondary and made things happen downfield. What I saw against Braxton Miller in this game that I have not seen all season, two things. Receivers covered. Philly Brown, Devin Smith, Evan Spencer, the tight end Jeff Hireman. Except for about 3 or 4 occasions, these guys had to fight off the line of scrimmage and couldn't get free, and we've not seen that all season. These wide receivers are not used to having to fight for position and fight for the football. They're usually open, number one. Number two, Braxton Miller usually has his way against the pass rush. He finds running lanes. Not this time. They bottled him up pretty well, excluding about 4 to 5 times. So Michigan State, credit the Spartans. I think this is a very underrated football team. Take away some pass interference calls, some extremely questionable, some were blatantly not pass interference calls against Notre Dame. Check out our video post going all the way back to September. And that was Michigan State's lone loss on the season at Notre Dame. Otherwise, Michigan State would be in this conversation. And to me, they should be in the conversation, but that's for another video post. It's clearly in the minds of most, Florida State and Auburn should be vying for the national championship. Okay, we're hearing that the early line out of Vegas will be that Florida State's at least a 7-point favorite against Auburn. I understand it because Florida State's been dominant and because Auburn's giving up a ton of points and because Auburn's one-dimensional on offense. I get it. But this team is extremely battle-tested in taking on Texas A&M, LSU, Alabama, Missouri. They have run through the gauntlet, this Auburn Tigers team. Also Georgia, some extremely tough football teams, of course, in the SEC. And Auburn has really picked up the pace in the second half of the season after that loss to the LSU Tigers 35-21. So at this early stage, for any people that like to throw down a buck, I would say take Auburn and run with a touchdown or more. Okay, if this is a 14 playoff, which we will have, of course, in college football in 2014, who are your 4 playoff teams at this point? Well, certainly Florida State's number 1, Auburn's 2. For most people out there, Alabama would be number 3. Then you would have all sorts of controversy. For me, it's Michigan State winning the Big Ten championship, defeating a number 2 team in Ohio State by 10 points, defeating some teams, although not given credit for top 25 wins at this point. How do you count top 25 wins? When Michigan State defeated Michigan, Nebraska, and Minnesota, those teams were all ranked in the top 25. It was the Michigan State win that knocked them out of the top 25. Otherwise, they had wins over 3 top 25 teams before the Ohio State Big Ten championship game. So for me, it would be Michigan State as that 4th playoff team. But certainly the resumes of Baylor and Central Florida would bother me as one-loss conference championship teams. I think that conference championship should mean a lot in a playoff scenario. And also, what about Missouri? Because like Georgia last season, they could say, yes, we know that we've got 2 losses, but the only reason we have 2 losses is because we won our division and had to play the toughest conference championship game out there in losing to Auburn. Otherwise, in the regular season, we only lost 1 game as well, and we lost that second game to number 2. And hey, that first loss was against a pretty good South Carolina team that I would have ranked 7th in the country. Check out my Twitter feed for our top 10 teams. I can't think of them exactly off the top of my head, I believe. Let's try it. Florida State number 1, Auburn 2, Alabama number 3, Michigan State 4, Ohio State 5. Then I went with Missouri 6, South Carolina 7, Stanford 8. I think I went Baylor 8, Stanford 9, and Clemson at number 10. I believe that was our top 10. And of course, we will talk so much about the Florida State-Auburn matchup and the BCS Bowls and the entire bowl schedule going forward over the next few weeks. Would love to now hear what you have to say about anything that we've discussed concerning the BCS National Championship Game and the Conference Championship Games on Saturday, right here on Mark Rogers TV.